Today I've brought you back to Hallcroft Fishery, and this is a venue that recently I qualified for the Maver Match This Final. The Maver Match This Final takes place at Ayfield Lakes later on in the year in September, and the qualifiers are run all through the year. This year it looks like there's going to be no international fishing abroad, so it's given me a chance to target some of these matches where there's quite a lot of prize money at the end. And I've booked tickets for Fishermania, for Maver Match This, and also for the Riverfest. Last year I qualified for the Riverfest. This year I've already qualified for the Maver Match This, and I've still got the rest of the year to go. So hopefully it's going to be a fantastic year of fishing. Arriving at Hallcroft, I was presented with a draw on Croft Lake, and Croft Lake is one of the smaller lakes here on the complex. But it's the home to some really big carp, as all these lakes are at Hallcroft. And the peg I drew were just peg 28 in the corner of Croft on the far side. And it's a peg that's got a little bit of room and a little bit of form. I've seen quite a few matches won, either on peg 1, which is the opposite peg on the other bank, or this peg 28 that I actually drew in the match. Now when I arrived at the peg, we had an high pressure over us, which means that usually carp are going to be shallow. And I'd got one bonus up my sleeve as such, that I'd already fished on the larger Moat Lake earlier on in the week on the Wednesday. And in practice I found that luncheon meat was a great bait, either punched on the hook or just fishing a cube. And because I was armed with this knowledge, I decided that once I drew on Croft Lake, meat would probably be the main attack that I were going to use, fishing both up and down. On the match I actually rigged a lot of equipment. I rigged up 10 top kits to cover all eventualities, to fish down the edge in the margins, to fish on the bottom out long, and also to fish up shallow as well. So I had a lot of top kits, and also I rigged 2 wagglers. But in the end I only actually used just one rig all of the match, a very, very simple approach to this day's fishing. When I arrived at the swim, there was a lot of fish moving on peg 1 opposite. There was carp very near the surface, maybe just a foot below the surface swimming about. But very few fish in front of me on peg 28 opposite. Once I started to fish, carp started to move around shallow, so I took the option not to feed anything at all and just try to fish for these fish near the surface, what everybody calls mugging nowadays, and trying to just put a bait in front of the fish. And that's almost how I fished for probably 2.5 hours of the match. I just sat there with most of the pole up the bank. I fished up to 14.5 metres out from the bank, but I just watched the surface of the lake. Now one thing that's very important when you're fishing for fish on the surface is a pair of sunglasses. And a pair of sunglasses allows you to see those fish that's out in front of you. And on peg 28 there's also a big bonus that the trees opposite cast a black shadow on the water, and this makes it so you can see the fish very easily below the surface. You can see the dark shapes swimming about. Now the rig that I used to catch these fish again was very simple. I fished almost a full top kit of line. So the top kit of my pole, I almost had a full top kit of line, so I could swing out to the fish. And the float also was mega important. I just used a crystal dibber, and a crystal dibber with the inline crystal dibber is very, very strong. It's almost impossible to break. And when you're catching fish with, most of the fish are caught around about 12 inches deep, a foot deep. And when you net these fish, they tend to wrap the float round them, and if you're using a balsa type float, often they destroy the float. And this type of float, the crystal dibber, is almost indestructible, and I use just the one rig all the match. Now, rigging this rig up again was something that I needed to assess. When I'd fished practicing earlier in the week, I'd probably fished with slightly undergunned line. I'd used an 018 main line and an 015 bottom. And I wanted to step this up because I realised that these fish are hard fighting, and there's some very, very big fish here in Hallcroft. So I used 020 main line, just a Suplex 020, which is very, very durable. And also it's a line that's quite light. Suplex is a light material and allows you to swing out to fish very easily. The hook length, again, I stepped up. I went to 017 Suplex fluorocarbon. And the hook also I stepped up, because when you're hooking big fish like this, you don't want the hook to spring or start to pull out of the fish. And I used a B911, a Kamasan B911 extra strong, just a size 16. And of course this hook's slightly flattered and very, very strong in the shape it is. Now, during the match, for probably 2.5 hours, I never fed anything at all. I just sat with the pole up the bank, waited while a fish came within range, which often they did, and then shipped out and tried to catch that one fish by flicking the rig to where they were. Same as I've said, fishing around about a foot deep, because all the fish were up near the surface. But after 2.5 hours, I realised that there were very few fish coming into my area. So I started loose feeding meat. And this was a little bit of a revelation really, because I'd probably gone maybe 3/4 of an hour where I'd struggled for just a couple of fish. So I started pinging meat out to 14.5 metre, just 6mm cubes. And of course, with the noise of the meat hitting the water, it started to draw more fish back into the area where I was fishing. I only probably caught 7 or 8 fish, fishing with the same rig, but just lifting it over, slapping it over to where the meat was landing. And I only caught maybe 7 or 8 fish actually where the bait was being fed at 14.5 metre. But of course, by using the long line rig, if any fish came within range off to the side, either to the right or the left, I could quickly flick the rig over to where the fish were. And I had a great catch rate in the back part of the match by loose feeding meat. By the end of the match, I'd actually caught 207 pounds, which is an incredible weight really, because we're still quite early in the year, and you know, the fish are not as active as what they are when it starts to get very warm. We've had frosts in the morning, but of course when you get a bright day and a high pressure, the fish want to be in those upper layers. So that's it. I've managed to qualify for the Maver Match This Final at Hayfield later on in the year. And let's hope that it's a great final with lots of fish to catch. And I've already noticed that there's some very good anglers already qualified, so it's going to be a real spectacle to watch once the final comes round.